que se presentaron
in the various areas presented in the document distributed by ECLAC for this meeting. Today, we will be having 3 panels this morning. We begin with globalization and gender equality, main economic and financial trends, moderated by Gady Gallo, Presidential Advisor for Women's Equity in Colombia. Moderator. Good morning, everyone. Today we begin our session of the 14th session of the Regional Conference on Women, Latin America, and the Caribbean. On behalf of the panel, Globalization and Gender Equality, Main Economic and Financial Trends. And we say of the greatest relevance because in the economic context of a digital economy, each time more globalized, we women have an endless number of challenges going from public policy, including gender equity in the business sector, and the relevance given by women's organization from the global viewpoint, together with international cooperation. And so in Colombia, we celebrate this chapter of the ECLAC's book, The Autonomy of Women in Changing Economic Scenarios. And today in this panel, we're going to hear the experience from 4 viewpoints. Which are the main trends, the challenges, so the context of globalization may be seen as an opportunity to speed up the measures to be implemented in order to close gaps facing women worldwide in terms of economy, politics, and eradication of all forms of violence. I will open with Dr. Rafael González Álvarez, who is Department of Macroprudential Analysis and Supervision Standards, Office of the Superintendent of Banks of Guatemala, an economist, has a master's in finance and has a PhD in economy, and has worked for more than 15 years at the Bank of Guatemala, and currently works at the Department of Macroprudential Analysis and Supervision at the Bank of Guatemala. Basically, he analyzes macroeconomic and financial aspects nationally and internationally. Rafael, the floor is yours, telling us how Guatemaltecan experience has been in this area. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the superintendents of banks, I would like to thank ECLAC for the invitation to this event so that we may hear what we're doing in Guatemala in terms of gender equity and banking statistics. About 5 years ago, we began this process. And now we have good outcomes. We began with 7 indicators, and now we have approximately 13 outcomes. Let me show you more or less what we've done and where we're headed. And also, I'd like to thank the team behind me at the Superintendents of Banks, and that supports us with statistics. Guatemala stands 113th in the Global Gender Index, medium to low, and politically 125th. Women's participation is scarce at legislative level. 31 deputies are women. So what have we done? The loan portfolio. Here we have 4 million loans for legal entities, private individuals, and of these 4 million loans, 43% is for women and 57% for men. As you can see here, the makeup has not changed since 2012. We've calculated the gender gap, and for women, it's 23 percentage points in terms of the number of loans. We included age groups, and here you can see that in terms of the number of loans to younger people, of course, the number of loans is less. Basically, it's concentrated in the age of 40 to 50. And then the balance of the loan portfolio in dollars, about $10.4 billion, 37% is for women and 63% men. It's not even 50%, the number of loans that have been awarded. The gender gap in this area is 40 percentage points. So it's remained more or less stable since 2012. And then the loan balance by amount. Here, yes, we see that the lower amounts are for women. For example, $6,000, $15,000 to $60,000. There, women's share is significant. But at the higher range, for example, $250,000, here women's share is 38% and men 12%. So there is a difference there. In terms of economic activity, we divide it into consumption, and loans for women are basically for consumer loans, and credit card loans. Business loans represents only 4%. The interest rate, well, here we can see results where the interest rate is higher for women. 21% for women and 19% for men. So the financial cost for women is higher. And this has remained over time. And then the interest rate by age group, we see that the younger segments, the financial cost is higher. As we can see here, age 30 to 40, the cost is higher. And also we can see that in all age groups, the cost for women is higher than for men. The loan portfolio by activity and interest rate shows that the consumer loans, where Guatemala, our banking system is basically a consumer system. There it's 43% for women, microloans 24%. And past due loans represent 355 million, and of these 355 million, women's share is 31% and men 69%. So, in terms of debt servicing, the women perform better. And in this case, it's 2.8 for women and 3.4 for men. And past due by age group, the highest past due rate is in the younger age groups, up to 30, 3.6 for women and 4.0 for men. Whereas later it normalizes 2.9 for women and 3.4 for men. But in all age groups, we see that women have better debt servicing than men. Now, in terms of past due, In most cases, women are less late with their payments. At the consumer loan 2.2, credit cards 3.2, and microloans 4.1. Now, this is the results by geographical area. And in terms of the backing or guarantees, women back their loans with 69.3% in trust equity and mortgage 19.6. But in the case of men, trust is 56.4 and mortgages 28.5. That is property backing. So the backing for men as well as women. So, in conclusion, what have we observed? Well, individual person loans are 80.7 billion, 37% for women. Of the total loan portfolio in past due, 69% is from men, and past due is lower for women than for men. The loan balances for women is lower. So where are we going at the bank office of the bank of the superintendents of banks? Well, this year we would like to cover this in the Guatemaltecan insurance market. So this is been very well received by the Guatemaltecan society and has been socialized with the banking entities. And some banks are making an effort and are advertising loans for women. This is very good. Entrepreneurship among Guatemaltecan women is very significant and helps them overcome poverty. Thank you. Well, thank you, Raul, for sharing that very interesting study in terms of public policy to make visible how women are doing financially in Guatemala and the steps to be followed in that country. And now we will continue with Cecilia Chagon, who is the Human Rights Secretary for Ecuador. She's a social communicator with a master's in public management and currently is the Human Rights Secretary and chairs the Mixed Commission for Justice in Ecuador. She was the vice president in the province of Tunguaya and coordinator of the Citizen Training Center at that same locality, and with more than 20 years' experience in public service. She is linked to several universities as a faculty member and takes part in the women's movement and drives the road to access justice for girls and women victims of violence in Darfur. Cecilia, thank you very much for being with us, and tell us what is the experience in Ecuador. Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. This is the first time I'm able to share with me my militant colleagues in the Americas. And today I am speaking the government in a secretariat for human rights. A major task, of course, and this is a secretariat with a very high incidence in policy in my country because I have many obligations that the state must comply with, especially thinking in ensuring the rights of women, people, nationalities, and human rights reports at international level. I accepted this because I think that this is a good chance for having an impact. But as of the moment you accept, this implies tremendous obligations, obligations for which I must resort to the women's and feminist movements and turn it into a large movement. There are women's of rights and laws and of all ages. And the women and feminist movement in our country is playing its role, which is exposing the scourge of the violation of rights. And here, of course, we must help each other out. It cannot be that those of us women who are in formal spaces should not see each other, and we must make sure that the patriarchal power does not see us as a mere instrument. We can sow in this area, but we can also reap. I will explain what this has meant in my country for my predecessors, but perhaps also what my predecessors in the women's movement have done to make this visible today in the Ecuadorian government. Within the framework of this voracious conservatism is a limitation that would seem that we may walk ahead detracted from from the rest of citizens and women, and that is a scenario that we're used to live in. We have a fight of our own to build awareness and have an impact inside, and I say this as based on my own personal experience in the cabinet. To each government, it's necessary to remind them that we women are more than 50%. In my country, 51%. And so, therefore, we must find partners within the cabinet, within the government. And in my country, perhaps one of the most important partners is the Vice President of the Republic, the government ministers, and the wife of the President. Nevertheless, the problem of globalization in such a small country such as mine is double. On the one hand, powers want and determine a role, but on the other hand, they also want to show that we're big countries. We're not. As in every country, the fight for rights is still that. It is a fight. And today, more than ever before, this is very clear. The complex scenarios that we have seen in so many Latin American countries at the expense of the globalized service that it is widening inequality gaps, all of this shows fragmentation, inequality, and discontent. That's one reality. These are also times of lessons learned. How to deny what we've experienced in recent months, sacrificing democracy, sacrificing people. This is not the solution. At the same time, we still look toward the state as an entity that inspires hope that rights will continue to be ensured. We're still in that dispute. The state is the subject of our hopes and dreams because the state has the resources. They have the budget. The state has the ability to mobilize throughout the country. This is also thanks to what's done by the civil society. And so the policies are less poverty, more development. This is the human landscape. Women are 92% of the people covered. The Banco del Pueblo, or the People's Bank, that seeks to give loans to individuals as well as associations. Misión Mujer, women's mission, economic empowerment for women, includes promotion and access to loans for women to achieve their autonomy. We have a plan to implement the gender equality hallmark and aims to create equal conditions for men and women, doing away with the gender wage gaps, including women who are acting in non-traditional sectors, promoting the balanced life and work with responsibility, and women's access to leadership positions. And in this sense, more than 22,000 civil servants, men and women, have accessed training on leadership, female leadership with a gender perspective. And today, my country is a pioneer in involving teleworking, which basically benefits mothers, women, and professionals. The National Corporation for People's Finances facilitates access by women to loans provided through other financial associations, through certificates and guarantees. The National Financial Corporation increased the number of transactions with women by 71%. It is important to note that in the country, the women's wage gap in comparison to men, based on an annual basis and in the last decade, shows a reduction of 7%, whereas in 2008, the wage gap between men and women was of almost 25%. By 2018, stands at almost 18%. The Organic Law for Labor Justice and Recognition of Work at Home in 2017 recognized unpaid work performed in homes and the Social Security system. This is a milestone for Latin America. As of this, paid household workers have a unified minimum wage equivalent to 40 hours a week, and they're members of Social Security. And also, we have reformed the labor code, and within the framework of the integral policy for LGBTI population, this covers persons in this group and assisted by 16 ministries, for which we have more than 500 representations of collectivities from the whole country. And now I would like to refer to the instances that we encompass. We have an organic law for the prevention and eradication of violence, barely adopted in 2018. However, it is a major crusade, including 22 institutions and 5 state departments. We've already presented our first report to the National Assembly with outcome not really as we would like or expected, but at least we've started. And here I would have thought that in major conclusions, in this scenario, our challenge is to maintain at government level space for concrete decisions. And here, women also should make visible what they're doing and contributing to real development, not seen as a demand, but as a proposal in order to join in in our fight against the challenge faced by countries at times of crisis. Thanks to Alicia Bárcena, we're considering a new architecture for Social Security and guaranteeing the rights of women. In the field of men, yes, but we're talking about the access of everyone to their rights. And he would like to emphasize that this pathway cannot be done alone. We cannot do it alone at the government and cabinet. No, we continue to need the support of the women's movement, not only as a voice, but the backing of those who today have this option of being working at government level. Thank you.
Cecilia, muchas gracias por presentar.
Cecilia, thank you so much for bringing us the comprehensive policy being conducted in your country on behalf of women. We now continue with Corina Rodriguez. She is a researcher from the Interdisciplinary Center for Public Studies, CIETA, and she is working on the alternative development, the new era. She's a doctor in social sciences. She works in that CIET, as I was mentioned. Her work is renowned in the region as an activist and as a member of the academia, working in feminist economy, care economy, fiscal social policy, labor market, poverty, and wealth distribution. Welcome, Corina. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be here in this debate. Congratulations to the organizing team, especially the people who drafted the document, position document. We're reflecting on it, especially in the chapter having to do with globalization. This is seen in three pillars: trade, finance, and fiscal policy. I would like to make a few comments and refer to each one of these three fields, starting from the general characterization of the globalization scenario that is seen in the position document. We are now in a highly interconnected world that is more unstable and that is characterized by financing and a system that automizes and changes the way things were done in the past. And in the current juncture where growth is slowing down, and other features that have to do with the extreme concentration of capital, wealth, and income. Having that context in mind, we will look at these three dimensions, figuring out how this favors or not women's economic autonomy and the narrowing down of gaps. The report is quite strict in looking at the situation and in putting out examples from different countries. I would like to mention some of the challenges and words of alert. The first is foreign trade. It's very important to explain globalization, always having in mind how to focus or to analyze this from the standpoint of gender equality. From what the document says, and also from much literature that is available, we can say that trade is neither good nor bad. Trade is not an end in itself, but a means. And it should be a means for the development of our economies. So the question is, indeed, is that actually happen? And if it's a means to that, is it useful for all economies? In Latin America and the Caribbean, and thinking about the impact on women, the result is mixed and ambiguous. And some of the results are alarming. The literature on this topic says that trade impact is better where there is an institution that rules and guides trade. So trade, foreign trade, contrary to some, works better when with stronger states. Equally important is thinking about trade as of analysis. We cannot think about trade as an isolated topic, separated from the rest of the economy. In order to push ahead this analysis, it's important that trade agreements and policies include commitments before the impact comes. This is something that is often mentioned, but very few times truly accomplished. Now, in the trade agreements that exist, during these moments where there's stress in between many countries and political difficulties in others, we see that bilateral trade agreements are abundant. And in these agreements, we find a modern feature, and that is gender chapters. We believe that it's very important that they exist as an expression of the concern some may have to figure out how trade affects women's lives and the inequality gap. And in these agreements, the governments of the parties involved commit themselves to follow certain standards and to devote certain activity and action towards gender equality. What I wanted to say is that often these gender chapters in trade agreements raise awareness to gender, but they don't always work. Often they are not binding, these chapters are not binding, and perhaps the aspirations of these gender chapters go in, contradict the other part of the agreements. I think it's quite positive that these chapters exist in the trade agreements. But this is not that positive if, in the end, these agreements risk the employment of thousands of women because they destroy jobs and the environment. So we should be aware or on the watch out for these chapters in trade agreements when they risk territories, communities, nature. The second pillar I wanted to talk about as related to globalization has to do with finances. I think that there is a great reflection on how to strengthen financial autonomy amongst women. As a matter of fact, we heard from Guatemala and others that have geared policies towards that end. In a very financial world where the production depends on access to loans, it becomes very important to have mechanisms that will destroy the barriers women face. We must also have in mind that we cannot think of financial autonomy in itself, isolatedly. And we think that what exists is not enough to foster production amongst women. We believe that, yes, access to loans indeed may help a woman to buy a sewing machine, but it's not that positive if, as a result, the woman would finally work only at home as hired by a corporation that fosters these unprotected jobs and informal jobs. Financial inclusion may also promote a financial extraction system. I'm afraid I have to hurry through my presentation, but I'd like to bring in other opinions. Outside of the Chilean banks here in Santiago, there's a sentence that says, "You owe us one life." In my country, our movement brings in manifestations between women, and they say, "Living free lives without debts." I think that is a sentence that expresses the financial extraction system we all live through. And now, fiscal policies and a few words, and I will be very brief here. It seems to me that fiscal policy is key in order to diminish the gaps. That is why the agreements reached are very important in warning about the gender bias in fiscal policies, especially tax policies. My message here is the need to face everything that is so-called impossible. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we always hear that the states are devoid of resources and they don't have the possibility to create more resources, and that as a result, We must reach to the private sector to fund what the state is unable to do. So, here a word of warning. All of the initiatives that aim at involving the private sector to support activity against gender discrimination and inequality. But I think that we should have fiscal incentives for the companies to, for example, reconcile family and labor lives amongst women. But let me say that the main responsibility for companies is to pay taxes. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we still have much to do with political willingness and with the construction of power so that the companies pay their due taxes and so that wealthy people also pay their taxes. Throughout the world, the greatest millionaires want to pay more taxes. They're demanding that, and this is proof of the obscene inequality in the wealth distribution throughout the world, and especially in Latin America, that, as we heard in the Civil Society Declaration, this is still the most unequal region in the world, in the planet. So this idea of what is impossible faces a political will, the construction of power, in order to build a progressive tax system that will tax wealth, and it will also look at the unlawful financial flows that are still the reason why many of our states don't have any resources. The companies don't pay their taxes, the states don't have resources, so they must call on these companies to fund what is needed. But this could be changed if the companies paid the due taxes. And let me wrap up by saying that in this panel, where we're thinking about globalization and economic trends right now, we are looking at a globalization of social resistance. And these global resistances are screaming, you owe us our lives. We now must rethink on the dynamic of globalization so that it may help out in the sustainability of lives. Thank you. Thank you, Corinne, for talking about these tremendous challenges that we are facing in terms of globalization and trade financial policies. We now continue with Ana Novica. She is the head of the investment division from OECD. She is currently working in the strategic guidance towards the General Secretary from OECD in trying to assist countries to improve their situation and status so that they may receive further investments. Before working at OECD, she was the director of multilateral issues from the Foreign Ministry, and she worked in Geneva as a permanent Chilean representation at WTO. She has a master's from Columbia University. You have the floor, Ana. Welcome.
Muchas gracias, Yadi, y muchas gracias también a la CEPAL por la invitación.
Well, I thank CLAC for the invitation. I agree with Karina that the document is very good to trigger discussions, investment policies, well, but I've also been involved with commercial issues for more than 20 years as the representative of the government of Chile. So I would like to speak to you about what I see in terms of globalization and trade, what Corina touched on, but I would also add investment, because that's not in the document, and I think it's also a very interesting dimension. Today, we are questioning globalization because I believe the region and the world recognizes that globalization has served to reduce poverty and has benefited many countries. But the benefits of the globalization have not been distributed equitably, and today, not only in this region, but around the world, there's questioning of how to ensure the gains of globalization are distributed more fairly, and this also has to do with gender. And so I believe that the discussion, the anti-globalization discussion, also has a very interesting and relevant gender dimension. Figures are not very promising here. This is a report from last year of ILO showing that disparities and gender differences persist in the labor market in developed and developing countries, and Latin America is no exception to the rule. Female labor share is under 20% worldwide. In the region, it's a little bit better, but nevertheless, the gap in comparison to male share is 20% and remains. And also another report that we drafted last year at the OECD shows that how in OECD countries and also in Latin American countries, only 1/3 of women professionals hold managerial positions and board positions. So we are still in the red. There are new studies, and I think that this is quite interesting to measure how women can be included. It's not just a matter of morality or ethics, but also an economic issue, because this speaks to a certain sector. And here we have no OECD studies showing how the potential growth of GDP increases quite relevantly, 25% in Mexico by 2025, 23% in Turkey, and 19% in Korea, if you reduce the gap in terms of the male and female share. Now, the question is, international trade and investment, does this help or not to reduce the disparities, and what could be done? Because I think that is the big question to get them to help, because as Karina was saying, the issue of trade, foreign investment should be a means for achieving what we want to achieve, which is the reduction of the gap. Within the OECD, in terms of investment policy, I'm doing a lot of work on this and changing the mentality, opening up, which has been opening markets, no opening markets, the neoliberal approach, to see how this could be a means to have a positive impact. So we have a new project measuring the quality of FDI, the indicators. What is the impact of FDI in various clusters in relation to the UN SDGs? So one of the clusters that we're measuring is gender, and we have some findings. So far, it's not easy to see the impact, the real impact, but for the time being, what we're doing is establishing relations. We're seeing in terms of the quality of employment. What happens when we have FDI in different countries? And a snapshot shows that FDI tends to be concentrated in areas where we have a lower female share, construction, finance, transport. But when you go to manufacturing, in detail, we see that yes, and especially in developing countries, FDI is positively related to female employment because it affects areas such as textiles and food. Now, in these sectors where the skills and wages are lower, it's interesting, because you have FDI, and often it allows increasing female employment in these areas, textiles and food, and often it's the first time that women are working, but these sectors, the wages are low, the level of skills is low. This reproduces the existing patterns. So what we are seeing is that thanks to FDI, we're not really changing these patterns that existed before, and so we need to do something additional if we would like to address that. And we see the same thing in terms of wage gaps. The other thing which I find interesting, because with wages you see exactly the same thing, that FDI goes to sectors, construction, finance, manufacturing, where we also have wage gaps, and this replicates the same patterns. So What can we do for the foreign direct investment? FDI has a direct positive impact. Now, when we begin measuring FDI and the empowerment of women in workplaces in terms of women's representation in managerial or higher position, there's a difference. FDI, yes, tends to be in sectors where there are more women in managerial positions and supports this of the female situation. The question here is, what can we do to strengthen this impact? We are now working on the second phase, which has to do with policy, because I think that there's a real thing here. If we have no changes in the domestic policies and factors, with everything that we've heard at the conference, access to finance, child care, so if we do not have these domestic policies supporting FDI, FDI is not going to make any difference. But I do also believe that we have a responsibility from the viewpoint of FDI and FDI policy. And that is what we want to connect in this second phase. We want to see how these investment policies could begin to contribute. I'm not going to talk about trade because you said it very well. But I would like to say that it is true that we need to welcome this because it is a good political indication. In 2017, we had WTO at a conference in Argentina. They reached a very good political commitment that the region has been a pioneer in Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, Brazil. I think that this is a positive step. However, we need to implement it. It needs to be connected to other aspects of the free trade agreements, as you were saying. I would only like to, before my time is up, refer to something that has not been much mentioned here and that I think is relevant. Here there is a role for the public sector, but also the private sector. And I think that the private sector, at the more macro level, we've seen it in the last conferences in Doha and others, is the private sector understanding that it must make a contribution, not just benefit. There's a call in relation to climate change, but also gender. And that's interesting because we're at a political moment when businessmen, also at least the big ones, are beginning to realize that this is something that will have to be considered. Financial funds, Blackfoot now said that they will not invest in any company that does not have a woman in a board, at board level, and that's positive. The private sector has an important role to play because they can influence their workers directly, how they determine the board, but also they have a responsibility. And this is very important. We at the OECD are working with this responsibility in the global value chains. They have due diligence that's been worked on with the UN, human rights and trade, and also the IPU. They need to measure the risk in the global value chains. And there are certain specific sectors, textiles, mining, where there are greater risks for women in terms of sexual abuse, discrimination. And so in the company operating matrices, these risks must be considered and offset. So that's also a call for the private sector because they must work together, public and private sectors. And on some, I would like to congratulate ECLAC. This is a topic that I feel passionate about and must be considered further. Thank you. Well, Anna, as you were saying, this is a passionate topic, and it affects all areas of the society. A short summary. And with regard to the question that you were asking, what can we do for all of these trends of globalization may have a positive impact on the life of women and closing the gaps for Latin American women. Claudia, you were mentioning something very important of what has been done in your country. I'd like to congratulate you because the Financial Authority is showing what is happening with women. That's the first step in order to implement public policy and to size up the situation. I think that represents the trend in Latin America, that being more than half the population the level, with a very low level of risk, we still have a long way to go to increase women's access to finance. When you're saying that people in Guatemala are reaching very low consumer loans, very few business one, and that the interest rates are higher than for men, this is something that we need to do. How can to change these scoring criteria in the way that the women's loans are assessed? And I think that what Alicia was saying yesterday during the presentation of the document, that in terms of the methodology that ECLAC has for working with the superintendencies or financial authorities in order to move ahead with this. But without a doubt, this of financial inclusion is also linked to something else that you mentioned, that is promoting female entrepreneurship as a form of economic autonomy for women. Cecilia, very interesting, the policy in Ecuador. I'd like to ask you that for Colombia, you can share all of the progress made. And one thing you mentioned, it's also very important in terms of globalization, in addition to the economic component, but this is a core line, your analysis of the triggers to move ahead, the reduction of violence in your country. This invites us to have a global approach from the economic viewpoint, the political viewpoint, and the eradication of violence with the sustainability concept. And from your intervention, I would like to highlight the last part, where you mentioned that how strategic and necessary it is in our dialogue between the government and women's movements in the civil society. We need to elaborate further on this. We need to strengthen it and be in constant feedback. How are women doing? What are they seeing? What is the government doing? And how can we supplement public policy jointly in order to move ahead with these challenges? Corina, your approach is very interesting, that a comprehensive viewpoint from the financial, fiscal, and business viewpoint. We have a lot to do, yes, but especially how to create these conversations between public policy and the organizations that are working for the advancement of the autonomy of women. As Christine Lagarde was saying at the IMF, if more than half of the population is not relevant for macroeconomic themes of the world and a country, that means we have a long way to go to see how to include the gender approach to fiscal policy. The IMF has been doing some very interesting studies under the smart economics umbrella. And I think that we need to move ahead in Latin America to see how to take in that sort of policy. And also very important, Corina, what you said, we celebrate the inclusion of those gender chapters in free trade agreements, and under that systematic approach that you mentioned, what we must make sure is that these chapters work. For example, the Pacific Partnership, very interesting work is being done there with women businessmen and SMEs, how to materialize that. But I really like that approach that you proposed of the comprehensive approach to commerce. And Anna, well, we are expecting these studies and light that the OECD can shed on how to use FDI flows to close the gap and the gender approach. Because you, with your authority at international level, it's very important that you be including the gender approach to FDI, because as you said, here we need to rethink what we are doing. And what we cannot allow is that these same patterns be reproduced once again in terms of the labor gap as well as the roles where we have traditionally been active as women. And also you mentioned another very important thing, that increasing co-responsibility by the private sector. I think that we must enhance that further. How to join in efforts by governments, I repeat, women's organizations, the private sector, and these international cooperation spaces to see how to speed up the change. I always reiterate a figure that affects us but calls us to action, and that is the last report by the World Economic Forum that analyzes 155 countries. And what they conclude is that from 2018 through 2019, we went from a gap of 202 years to 256 years to close the gap in economic terms between men and women. So, before recognizing the flaw, I would like to celebrate what's being done. We must see in Latin America and also the rest of the world what good practices are giving good outcomes and having a positive impact on the life of women. Because there's another major theme, part of the second panel. How can we women join globalization, and how can we include the knowledge economy and the change drivers, not to perpetuate existing patterns, but to close gaps. Having said this, we will now move on to the governments, the interventions, questions, comments on the panel. Argentina is recognized. Hello, good morning, everyone. And first of all, I would like to make general comments on the work done by Argentina and the position of our country. Many studies show that the greater inclusion of women in the economy in equal condition to men could have a positive and significant impact on global growth. According to the ILO, global GDP could increase by $5.3 billion by 2025 if the gender gap were to come down by 25%. In this sense, for our country, closing the gender gap is a moral imperative, but also an economic one. The commitment of Argentina with the economic empowerment of women has been proven with the Declaration of Buenos Aires on Women and Trade in 2017, issued within the margins of the 11th and 18th World Meeting and supported by 120 countries, including Argentina. To that we will add commercial negotiations where Argentina and Mercosur have agreed with their counterparts on account of their increasing relevance chapters and specific reference to gender, as is the case of our agreement with Chile, our neighboring country, and also negotiations with Canada, Peru, and Mexico. In line with this document, we believe that the declaration of the WTO is an important achievement to ensure an increased participation of women in international trade, being the first initiative in the history of that organization. A multilateral trade system based on rules, open, non-discriminatory, and equitable is extremely important in order to correct the asymmetries and increase international cooperation for the economic empowerment of women. And within that framework, this conference on women is a new opportunity to deal with current imbalances in terms of gender in the global economy. And in fact, the inclusion of the gender approach to global trade is a tremendous potential for the economic empowerment of women. And this will also contribute to significantly improve the development of micro and SMEs, and especially women business women and those working with the gender approach. In this sense, Argentina has included various technologies to public government procurement in order to increase efficiency, transparency, and access, and aiming towards improvements in quality and sustainability that would also bring benefits to women entrepreneurs. As recognized in the document that we've mentioned, it is clear the relevance of greater access to financing and ICTs for women entrepreneurs, considering that most of these SMEs in the hands of women in developing countries are excluded by their financial institutions or do not award these services in necessary conditions. And so the financial inclusion, training, and developing partnerships among companies are essential to increase participation by women entrepreneurs in international trade. And along these lines, we would like to highlight women que liberan and exporting women being being carried out today by Argentina. In sum, public policies must provide the tools to enhance opportunities for women businessmen for insertion in global value chains. And so Argentina would like to confirm its commitment to continue working to advance in gender policies to achieve inclusive development without leaving anyone behind, in line with the 2030 Agenda. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Argentina.
Thank you, Argentina. We now give the floor to Nicaragua. Good morning. Thank you very much. Since this is the first time we hold the floor, we'd like to thank ECLEC for the support provided. We are also thankful to our sister colleagues from Chile who are hosting this event in such a lovely country. We would like to mention in general terms what is being achieved in Nicaragua. Let me say that the current administration under President Ortega and the colleague Rosario Mortillo, Vice President, are promoting progress, peace, and sustainable development. They have thus encouraged the full exercise of all of our rights amongst women from a socio-economic and cultural standpoint. The gap of inequality has been reduced to historic levels. Our government assigns priority to the gender venue in all of our programs to ensure the full participation of women in enjoying their own rights in decision-making positions, thus contributing to the progress of our country. The most recent report from the World Economic Forum for 2020 has said that we are the best-rated country in this continent in terms of gender equality, and the fifth country with more gender parity, only after four northern countries: Iceland, Norway, Sweden. As a result of our gender policies that have been implemented under the Sandinistic system under our President Ortega. In view of the implementation of gender policies in Nicaragua, we used to be number 90 in 2007. We're now ranked 5th. We are the country that has narrowed and closed gender gaps in only 12 years. We are now the first in the hemisphere, in Latin America and the Caribbean, and amongst developing countries throughout the world. UN Women, in their report for 2019, Women in Politics, ranked our country second in terms of women taking up high positions, and we're also ranked high in terms of congresswomen. 9 of the positions in our ministries are taken up by women. Of the most important positions in terms of women, we have a vice presidency in Women's Supreme Court, in the General Attorney's Office, Defense Minister, Attorney in charge of human rights, mayor in Managua, the capital city. And in terms of representation in the judiciary, we may talk about more than 56% in the National Assembly, and even above 40% in the town halls, more than 60%, council women as well. And in terms of other branches, we have more than 50% of women taking up these positions. In the National Assembly, for example, 57% are women, 40% judges in the Electoral College, 41% women in the Supreme Court, 50% general controllers, and 57% in the Board of Directors of the Central Bank. In view of the changing scenarios and the predatory capitalistic systems that are so separated from our we have now implemented a socioeconomic systems empowering women to reduce poverty and to reduce inequalities. They are now having access for the first time to loans towards cooperatives and the promotion of micro and small businesses. We are thus assisting women in more vulnerable areas. Nicaragua has mechanisms for the advancement of women. We have a women's ministry. We have this ministry only for women with a budget coming from the national budget, developing all functions to coordinate every activity related to women. In the last 12 years, with our Christian socialistic model, we are focusing values, changing attitudes and behaviors, as well as power relations as of family and community. Much has been accomplished during these 12 years towards state legislation to respect family, to prevent violence against girls and women, with a new social cultural pattern for the reivindication of gender and the full protection of women. We have now eliminated discrimination against women on the job from a social cultural standpoint with the implementation of equality, equity, complementarity, respecting equal rights. We are now meeting the National Human Development Plan in its third stage from 2018 up to 25. This is part of our public policy. All of this progress has been enabled in Nicaragua. We're one of the smallest economies in the region, but this has been done thanks to the high-level political willingness and the love for Nicaragua in peace and with a great future. Thank you. Thank you, Nicaragua. Colombia, you have the floor. Thank you. We really wish to welcome the topic for these panels because there are so many things involved here in this very important conference, as well as parallel events. When we think about cost-benefit ratio of globalization with a gender focus, we must realize that many foreign trade models and the creation of value throughout the world is being displaced towards knowledge-intense industries and also technology-intense. As a region here in Latin America and Caribbean, we have gaps in the training process. One of every 4 youngster in Latin America makes the decision to go into science, math, whereas in countries that have already gone through further development, it's one of every 2 youngsters to enter the scientific or technological world. So this is a big challenge that we're facing. The gender focus and the benefits from foreign trade are related to the possibility we may have in the region for more training in scientific, technological innovation fields. Here, evidence in the region shows that the gender gaps are even wider. That is, we have gaps in skills, in math performance, and especially cultural stigma that in turn brings in barriers for the participation of women in these knowledge sectors. In Colombia, we have been reflecting on the importance of statistical information and its value. We see, for example, gender focus, interest rates, as well as gender focus on statistical information, and this is in turn going to better guide public policy. This is of great importance. The importance of our statistical institutes making decision with this very complex focus, including value chains and technological industries. This all requires information so that women, in turn, may profit from this new opportunity to add value and prosperity, and at the same time, closing down these gaps. Thank you. Thank you, Colombia. Costa Rica. Good morning. Madam Chair, we wish to congratulate all of the organizers for this event and for the excellent panels. I also congratulate the speakers for this panel. Let me say that Costa Rica has a national policy for gender equality, and this aims at producing change in the way we look at gender. And that is a policy that runs from 2018 up to 2030. The idea is to get rid of structural nodes according to four axes: culture towards rights, time distribution, wealth distribution, and power distribution. As with the wealth distribution, what we want is to have economic autonomy for all women through the use, access, and control of their own incomes with quality jobs and financial inclusion for women. We wish thus to reduce the financial gap that is such an important component in our lives. A lot is being done so that women may have their own bank accounts in partnerships with banks, such as opening up their own accounts, working with the securities market. But equally important is a recognition that women in my country, in spite of having narrower gaps between men and women, still the women are the ones that receive less money. They are the ones to pay first, and still much remains to be done. Even though financial inclusion is very important for women, we must also bear in mind that once included in the financial systems, if these policies do not consider the special differentiated needs between men and women, what results is further exclusion. But exclusion with indebtedness, an exclusion that may involve even more poverty because of the loss of their own assets. This is of the utmost importance. We've been also debating in my country to figure out the correct rate to define limits and thus get rid of abuse. This is an ongoing discussion right now in my country, having fair rates, that recognize the abuse that exists. We're also working to have further legislation to protect women from financial services. In talking about trade, we fully endorse the importance of FDI policies. They should follow the criterion of breaking through stereotypes, contributing to break through the inequality cycles and the privileges that we've been talking about these couple of days. And finally, let me say that we fully agree with the fact that the business world should be in charge of the value chain. And this means working with an equality focus. We are clear on this. we should respect diversity, but we should also respect the environment. We're talking about equality in all fields. If we truly wish to break through the privilege system going forwards into more and more equality. Thank you. Thank you, Costa Rica. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here today to have this opportunity to provide a few brief comments on behalf of the Government of Canada. Canada believes that every person should have the opportunity to reach their full potential while contributing to and benefiting from economic growth opportunities that stem from globalization. We recognize that through globalization, the world has become increasingly integrated, leading to new opportunities, markets, and investment. However, it's clear that not all sectors of our society have had equal access to the new economic opportunities brought forward by globalization. And this is why it is important that we work together with international partners to ensure that the benefits of globalization reach all citizens. It's important that we continue to press forward with this work. And this is in part why Canada has adopted a feminist approach. We have a feminist foreign policy and we have a feminist international assistance policy. We firmly believe that women and girls have the ability to achieve real change in terms of sustainable development and peace. And I'm grateful that through forums such as this one, we have a great opportunity to help foster the discussion and advance ideas that will permit greater economic participation of women, which will drive economic growth and lead to a safer and more prosperous world. Thank you.
Canadá, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Canada. The floor is open. Haiti, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Madame,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Executive Secretary, UN Director from UN Women, participants, ladies and gentlemen from civil society, dear colleagues, I would like to thank all of you present here. And on behalf of the government from Haiti and of the President of Republic, Jovenel Moïse, I bring all my sympathy and feelings towards Cuba and Jamaica that have been suffering this terrible earthquake January 28th. Haiti wishes to express our solidarity. 25 years ago, Haiti started participating on the road towards equality. We participated during the first International Women's Conference, and we signed the declaration for the Beijing Action Platform. Haiti has believed that we wish to build a society giving opportunities to all girls and women. There's a national plan for women 2014-2034 and another for 2014-2020, and these have been put to practice as of 2014. In spite of the political issues for 25 years now, the instability, natural catastrophes, where we suffered a terrible earthquake that we suffered as of 2010. That was on January 12th to 2010. Haiti, in spite of all of this, is still striving to have a more equal society. We are still facing a tremendous challenge in all fields. That is why Haiti continues fully committed to speed up the meeting of SDGs. And in order to do so, Haiti, together with our partners from civil society, will continue devoting deep efforts with actions towards innovation, all in all fields having to do with the equality between men and women. On the economic fields, Haiti will continue reinforcing the implementation of the lending program called ONAFAM. This is solely devoted to women so as to have credits at low rates towards women. The government also reinforces the support to rural women and women devoted to trade. And this is called FADECA. Women in agriculture is also part of our efforts, and this is all through the fund from Norway. Now, as to health, in spite of all efforts devoted, we still have a little access from women. Maternal mortality rate has diminished, but it's still very high because we're talking about 525 of 100,000 cases between 2013 and 2015. Haiti will continue tackling health issues that women and girls face through our health policy and our policy towards equality 2014-2034. The protection of women is incipient in Haiti, in spite of all efforts devoted because of the crisis that we are facing. This crisis has meant more insecurity, more violence against women, violence against girls. Women suffer. They're vulnerable, especially rural and women who are in trade. The violence against the girls and women is terrible. There's now a 16-day campaign that was launched by our President of the Republic, Mr. Moise.
les femmes.
In spite of all of this, the President has condemned violence and the violation of women's rights. And he says that every action should be adopted to support women that have suffered and have survived, making sure that the aggressors suffer the full strength of law.
Organisé.
In view of the breadth of the issue, there's been a national consultation to reinforce a multisectoral response to rape. And the government has already taken steps in response to this collective rape of women in the jail of K. However, we must recognize that the vulnerability of resources is an important barrier to respond to the needs of all the women that survive these gender-based violence. The disproportionate negative impact of the climate of tension and lack of safety in affecting women and young people, and the situation held by women in Haitian society leads to women taking part very significantly in peace. And according to the UN Resolution 1325, organized by the First Lady of Haiti, Her Excellency Martine Moïse, the National Forum of Women, Peace and Political Participation of 3 and 4 of April 2019 was a historical forum with all powers meeting with women, young people and men in order to agree on actions in order to implement all measures and greater representation of women in the construction of endurable peace and increase partnerships with for development. In conclusion, or in line with the conclusions of this forum, we will draft on a national peace, women, peace and security, strengthening the ability of women in the fields of politics, peace construction, and a greater mobilization of young people and men in favor of gender equality in the sector of justice. We will have a reform putting an end to, or to put an end to all laws that discriminate against women. A national strategy for equality before the law from here to the year 2030 has just been reviewed and validated in order to speed up this process. The state of Haiti will continue along this very relevant path in order to meet the aims regarding the rights of Haitian women and young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all partners for development accompanying Haiti. We especially would like to thank, and in particular, the group of technical and financial partners for gender equality, chaired by Canada and France, in technical cooperation with UN Women. And lastly, Haiti would like to congratulate the draft Santiago Declaration and renews its commitment to actively contribute to the celebrations for the 25 years since Beijing in order to achieve very quick changes in favor of gender equality around the world. Thank you. Thank you very much, Haiti. Any other country that would like to take the floor? Bolivia. Thank you. And my greetings to the chair, and my thanks to ECLAC and UN Women for the efforts made, and also congratulations of all countries present here. I see here a great commitment, total commitment by everyone. And this leads me to, on behalf of my country, congratulate everyone. We are seeking all the aims put forward in previous conferences may be met. Globalization is a reality. And gender equality, which is what brings us here today in this panel, is not only an economic need, it is an act of justice. In our country, just to give you an example, agricultural property ownership, which is an issue in Bolivia. Agricultural property ownership, well, it is possible. Women can own agricultural land since 1952. And we have for about 70 years since this agrarian reform of 52, and indicators of agricultural land in the name of women is still shameful. So it's a long task. And I'm just barely touching a small aspect, because the panel, among the main economic and financial trends, that we know that the agriculture is the most basic of economies. And today, it's not only in vogue, but the reality today is different. Today, we have the new technology economy. We believe that we must enhance and empower women in all fields, of course, in line with the main economic and financial trends in the field of action of the economy, finances, technology. Women must be enhanced. Women must be empowered. But also not overlooking more basic economies, such as the example that I was just mentioning, the agricultural economy. And for that, it is very important to have training. And I would merely like to inform you that our President, Janine Yañez, has made a historical announcement for all Bolivians, which is an increased budget for health and education. That is, more resources will be assigned by the state machinery for health and education. And this will result not in immediate term, but in long term, will mean that we will have citizens well-informed, empowered, and that will be able to take on the challenges of the main financial and economic trends. We fully believe in gender equality, and we are committed to this. And we congratulate everyone here, because this means that everyone together, we will achieve great results. Thank you.
Gracias, Bolivia.
Thank you, Bolivia.
Bueno, si no hay más
Well, if there are no further requests for the floor, we will... no, sorry, UNDP is recognized. Well, I'd like to thank ECLEC and the panel. We, too, have contributed to the position document, and we would like to accompany these discussions on globalization and economy. At UNDP, we would like to say that we're accompanying processes in countries and point to the presentation of the last report in 2019, which has, as Alicia was saying yesterday, rethinking globally. Messages that transform things. At this time of transition from modernity toward sustainability, which means that no more of the same thing. So how can we start thinking of a new development model that will lead to new responses in the situation of climate change on the one hand, and on the other, in deep industrial and technological transformation? I'd like to mention the 5 main messages of that report, because I do believe that this could help countries of the region to move ahead and not be left with this mere discussion. With regard to globalization, we must think of processes financing for development as though this were a sort of silver bullet. We need to rethink this and see it as a multidimensional strategy, integrated, and so we also need to think about the institutions for financing for development. Despite the progress made in human development, inequality continues. We've made progress, but inequalities linked to what we call increased capacities are extreme. In this sense, we could have first gains in education. We have improved birth rates and life expectancy, but what we need is for people to understand and use technology to be resilient to climate change. And today, as mentioned yesterday by the civil society and young people, states today do not have policies for this new cycle of enhanced capacities. That's the first message of the report. The other message is that the inequalities of the 21st century are, in addition to inequalities, the power imbalances of the 20th century. That is, gender inequality, intercultural and intersectional gaps. This has been mentioned, and countries recognize them. These power imbalances and of inequality required a change in the metrics. The yin and the yang are no longer useful for understanding these inequalities. We need to review the metrics and how to rethink these inequalities. We can often have, with a low Gini, That means countries living in poverty. So we need to rethink these elements of inequality. And the fifth and most important is that these power imbalances, we need to act quickly before they become a very profound political domain. And that is a crisis. The power imbalance, the concentration of balance at different levels, we as countries, as international cooperation, we need to prevent this from transferring to the domain of political power. And so in terms of regulation, as it is presented, in terms of the extension of the social protection system, it is necessary to activate it. That is why, in relation to this, this is not just a matter of a few agencies, but the entire UN system acting, all countries. The time is to do things and truly transform these models that, because on account of what scientists have been saying for a long time, we don't really have that much time left. Time is running short. And so, once again, I would like to assure countries that UNDP is accompanying the countries. We need to rethink development models and move towards new models in terms of financing, and where the gender perspective is not as being included, and new forms of financing. There's a lot of interest, but we continue to work on this, for which we need new public policy. Thank you.
PMA, por favor. Muchas gracias, PNUD.
Thank you, UNDP and World Food Programme. This is a UN World Food Programme. Our commitment is that at least globally, 10% of the food purchases would be made from small producers of grains and other basic foods. In the region, this initiative had great echo, and this is in addition to 2014 and 2015, our policy for gender equality and empowerment. To date, almost 40% of the purchases made from small producers comes directly from women. And this 40% was not from the start. The percentage of purchases at the start was minimum. And that meant we tried to understand which were the restrictions that women had in order to access the market that the World Food Programme was offering. One of the major limitations that we identified was financial inclusion. But not only financial inclusion, limited to access to financing. We often want to talk about financial inclusion, and we focus on the financing. But women were restricted from other products, say insurance, farming insurance, life insurance, disability insurance in case they had an accident. And so we began to work on these things. And this is something that we would have to see as such. Financial inclusion is not just access to financing. We still have fairly limited offer of financial products for farmers, far less for women. Say, agricultural insurance. They benefit the financial sector more than the small-scale producers. Why? Well, because as a rule, small-scale producers do have access to farming insurance if they have financing from a financial institution. And as a rule, the insurance covers the financing that they are getting. But what happens with small or scale producers lose their crops? The insurance does cover part of this and repays the loan, but does not help the farmers out thereon. So we need other products that could really benefit the families. We've worked on this and we have made progress, but it's not been easy, because we still do not have the right legislation to facilitate the access by women to financial products. Another thing is financial education. women have scarce access to financial education. And the other major issue had to do with access by women to financial sectors, and that many of the governments of the region had created financing systems for small-scale producers, but this was small-scale loans, and for different reasons were not repaid. So a lot of these people were included in high-risk groups. So we have a large number of women who are rated as high risk and so have no further access to financing. But so what we need is to find a mechanism to help get this group of people that are rated in this way and so get no financing. So we need to include this. Financial inclusion is more than access to financing. There are other products that we must ensure women are able to access and also have these risk groups. How many people do we have in these risk groups, and this restricts their access to financing? Well, we thank you, and so we adjourn this panel, and we would like to invite you to the next panel, very much connected to globalization, on digital revolution, trends and impacts on women's lives. And so we invite the panelists to come forward. Thank you.
Good morning. We will resume today's work. We immediately initiate our panel called Digital Revolution Trends and Impacts in the Lives of Women. The moderator will be Mr. Mario Cimoli, Deputy Executive Secretary from ECLAC. He will now hold the floor for initial comments. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel. Here at ECLAC, we believe that digitalization is one of the most important topics nowadays. We also believe that working on digitalization should place gender on the top of the list. Before even talking about digitalization, we should start out with gender, then digitalization, and then all the rest. And why? Because if there is a sector that requires positive policy, space for action, and be improved on through quality and productivity is found in the sector of digitalization. It offers a new debate and a strong change in almost all of the topics involved in gender. Let me mention one of the most important ones. The digital revolution and its impact in processes having to do with automation, robotics, and international and artificial intelligence. This has a very, very big role to play, and this in trade, in industry, in agribusiness as well. But there are some sectors where the weight of the impact will be disruptive. Everything that has been gained in the maquila industry in Central America will change because of this new perspective. If we continue believing that the labor market, that plant layouts, its relation with the productive process, it will be the same as we had 10 or 20 years ago. If we talk about employment, management, without bearing in mind the impact of digitalization, we wouldn't be doing things right. Now, the thing is that if we don't consider digitalization, if we continue thinking about everything in terms of economic autonomy, we will be continuing using the same production models, the same management as if it were all alike. But things are changing. We believe, as ECLAC has said, that gender should be placed first in all agendas. Once this hits certain sectors, we'll have an even greater gap. If we are to maintain the care economy without wages, without recognition, informal, why, on the other hand, if we must realize the negative condition that is brought through keeping the same systems without including digitalization, we would incur in a tremendous mistake. The other topic that is very important, when we think about all of the intermediate classes, we realize that one of the basic elements, as we heard in the opening ceremony, and also what we heard of in a side event, the intermediate topics have an important gender element. Much has to do with vulnerability and expectations of intermediate sectors, and the role of women are so important. If we don't rethink of the new model for job demand, the new skills that are needed, the new active policies to find jobs. Evidently, the micro level will be affected. So it's extremely important, and that we should place it on the top of the list. There are new things that must be considered, but these are technical solutions, not political solutions. We must have political solutions to place this on top of the agenda. So welcome to all of this. Many of the jobs that had been created, as you well know, the employment model is changing deeply. A gender policy on digital issues is crucial for the whole region. And when we talk about the political package, they talk about everything else, and the digital field is last. And then all of the ministers are happy, but no, we must change things around. Not just talking about the needs to do so because of the impact on production, but also everything having to do with the mid-digitalization. We must then have an action plan on this for positive policies. Having this topic at the last item on the list would be a mistake because it has an impact on production, but it also has a strong impact on sustainability of middle classes. This is crucial. Thank you. That would be my comment on the digitalization. Thank you, Mario, for that introduction. And I now give the floor to Janice Villalobos. She is from Costa Rica, from the Women's Ministry in Puerto Rico. She has a master's degree on IT from Costa Rica Technological Institute. She has wide experience in public management, especially in the legislative branch. There, she helped draft laws on science and technology. She's currently director of knowledge, science, and innovation from the science ministries. She has been working on equality between men and women and employment, science, technology, telecommunication, innovation. Janicia, you have 10 minutes. Good morning. I'm very thankful for being here in this panel on the digital revolution and in talking about the policies for promoting equality between women, especially in science, technology, and innovation. In spite of what we've been doing for human rights for women, we're still facing many challenges. One of them lies in the science and technology field. Access to jobs under the same conditions indeed a challenge in our countries. Women's aspirations find obstacles in entering these jobs, especially because the jobs offered are of low quality and low wages. All of the people that graduate in my country, 62% are women. But in spite of this, they lie in fields where there are lower wages and low quality. If to that we add the fact that less than 20% of the women come into the scientific fields.
Different forms of engineering, not even there, 10% there. In others were around or below 20. And in addition, and regarding the presence of women in research, the situation is similar. By 2017, according to the National Indicator Report on Science and Technology, women represented 24% of all researchers in engineering. Today, we're speaking of the fourth industrial revolution, of the 4.0 industry, where disruptive technologies AI, automation, and others that change everything. The way that we communicate, they change the way that we work and change the way that we enjoy the benefits of science and technology. We must take this into account on account of the risks that these automation processes represent for women. As Mario was saying, on account of the current percentages. Although this shows many challenges, but also there are many opportunities to further development. The 4.0 industry represents for my country, and so we're convinced, opportunities to include women in new sectors of the economy. And so it is necessary to have public policy and take actions in response to these challenges. And that is why at the Ministry of Science and Technology in Costa Rica, together with INAMO, with more than 15 ministries and public organizations, and the civil society, academics, OIA, and ECLAC, and public-private partnerships, we have joined efforts, made commitments, and we work to promote equal share of women and men in the attraction, permanence, training, research, and quality employment in the various fields of science, technology, and innovation in order to facilitate enjoyment of scientific and technological progress in equal conditions. The equality policy in science and technology is there by decree, and after a consultation in all regions of the country, we were able to adopt last August the first plan of action that considers 5 years, including actions to be taken in all regions, because we've understood that without this regional consultation, we would be unable to achieve the goals set out as a country, because each country has its own specificities. In these 5 pillars, the first is attracting women to science and technology with educational opportunities, but carried out at all levels. We promote scientific and technological vocations and carry out activities to overcome the gender barriers. We are working on stereotypes. At an early age, it's not possible that a girl to think that she's not good at math. When we open up a workshop on robotics, 80% are boys, but that is what we find on a day-to-day basis. The second pillar is training of women in scientific and technological courses. Basically, we work on this with universities and where we carry out actions for these women who did decide to study in this area may have opportunities and that they have a guaranteed place at universities. We work on permanence because it's not easy to find yourself in a group where you are 30 men and only 2 or 3 girls. We must have healthy environments with environments of respect for these girls to finish their studies. We have understood that regardless of what we study, science and technology today affects everything. It doesn't matter if we are studying law or medical care, science and technology is cross-cutting. So we are convinced of continued education. And that is why we encourage through PIN, which is a special fund of non-reimbursable grants, where we award scholarships in these areas, and they are done throughout the country. We also encourage work, which is the third pillar of the policy. We work with PPPs. We see inspiring cases of women that help other women to not believe that to be a leader you need a top score, because it's women who do not apply for these positions because they want the top score, But men, even with a lower than top score, they apply and get them. So we've also understood that it's important to have soft skills. We've seen that it's not just a matter of digital literacy, but what we need is to get women to work in cooperation groups to gain skills at an interdisciplinary level. We also work with the fourth pillar, social appropriation of science and technology, whereby we go to communities and then through science and technology, it is possible to resolve issues at community level. In Costa Rica, we have these smart community centers, laboratories that now we're turning into social innovation laboratories where we place technology at the service of community with 3D printers, cutters. We provide courses on AI and robotics, and 65% of the people who attend these workshops are women. And that is why we are convinced that we do have a major opportunity here through training and coaching, and with a proper public policy, we will be able to achieve this. For this, we also need to go slowly and surely. Violence in the networks is an issue. The fifth pillar is what we call institutional capacity building. We have a high-level committee with 15 institutions and ministries, education, labor, academics, and they are committed. They signed an agreement and were party of those who approved the action plan. And now, in another month, we'll be signing commitments and actions for year one. We're hoping to show what we've done without leaving anyone behind. At these smart community centers, we have some also for the elderly, where we have teams for people with disabilities, and we would like to involve everyone with these new technologies. Follow-up is very important. We do have a system of assessment and follow-up for the implementation of the policy. If we do not see what's going on, and if we don't have indicators showing that we're on the right path, we cannot assess. This is essential and not been easy, because we know that in many of our countries, baselines are zero, and this is something that we have to build on. So I would like to thank everyone for this opportunity, but I did want to share with you this policy that has entailed more than 2 years' work, because we're convinced that without public policy, without coaching, without coordinating and including the private sector and the public sector, it's difficult to move ahead, and we could run the risk that instead of this being an opportunity, may increase gaps. We're working on empowering women in education, training, learning for life. In our support networks, public-private partnerships, because we need more science and technology for everyone, and science and technology produced by and for women. Thank you. Thank you, Janixia, for sharing the experience of Costa Rica. The relevance of multisectoral cooperation for integral policies required by the digital revolution with a gender approach. And now I'd like to recognize Carmen Bueno, Senior Specialist in Health and Safety at Work of the International Labor Organization for the Southern Cone of Latin America. And Carmen has a degree in political and science and sociologist at the Universidad Complutense of Madrid, Master in Public Policy in Latin America with the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, and a higher technician in occupational risk from an institute in Spain. She worked with labor inspectorates at the Ministry of Labor in Spain, and in 2009 joined the ILO as a specialist in labor inspection at the ILO Office for Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Since 2011, she's a main specialist in safety at work at the ILO for the southern cone of Latin America. Carmen will be speaking to us from the viewpoint of the future of labor. 10 minutes. Thank you, Ileana, and allow me first of all to thank the organizers, ECLAC, for wanting to enjoy a collaboration by the ILO Office for the Southern Cone of Latin America. My presentation will be somehow inspired on the impact that this digital and technological revolution is having not only on the work of women, but decent work for women. Just a few data to provide a context, reminding us of the challenges facing effective equality in the world of labor, and especially in Latin America. The unemployment rate, according to most recent ILO data presented last week in the document Social Outlook Unemployment Around the World 2020 Trends, presented at our office in Geneva, as well as the Labor Outlook for Latin America and the Caribbean, presented, I believe, yesterday or the day before, the same week. The unemployment rate hits women in the region hardest. We're talking of an unemployment rate of 8.1%, but that rises to 9.7% for women. The same regarding the underemployment due to insufficient working hours. 1 out of 4 women in the region works less than 30 hours a week in comparison to 1 in every 8 men. It is a structural issue in Latin America and the Caribbean. 53% informality rate, rising to 1.3 percentage points in the case of women. Also, we've detected that access by women to employment does not necessarily mean access to decent work. There are shortcomings in decent work, which mean that almost 20 million workers in our region are living in extreme or moderate poverty. Gender gaps, I'm sure, this has already been mentioned. We're speaking of women's share in the labor force in the region in 2019 of 22.4%, below the rate for men. The Executive Secretary General of ECLAC has already referred to the impact of automation on female employment, and especially in those sectors of higher risk of automation. As you can see in the presentation, there's data on this. In Latin America, the wage gap continues to be an important issue. We are saying that women get 13 points less than men. And underemployment rates, our figures indicate that more than 36% of workers worldwide work more than 48 hours a week. The gender situation is also affecting occupational health. We see how the annual figures of the ILO estimates of workers that die as a result of their work is these deaths are each time more due to not to occupational accidents, but occupational hazards with the face of a woman. The previous speaker also referred to this in the context of Costa Rica, the digital gap. In Latin America, and according to UNESCO data, only 1/3 of graduates in science and technology, engineering and maths courses are women. And after this context, and based on the report published by the ILO last year, the World Commission on the Future of Labor, I would like to share with you some of our recommendations precisely to channel the digital and technological revolution in favor of women's decent work, and take the opportunity to address these challenges. And because otherwise, quite likely, these inequalities will increase. It is necessary to promote constant learning for life to reduce gaps between what is taught and is now required, especially within the context of the future of work, because that is the labor market. It is necessary to make changes and bring the working and training worlds together, and especially courses followed by women. As the Deputy Executive Secretary said, thinking that the technological change will force women to find new jobs, especially in sectors with higher risk of automation that usually are the low-skill jobs. And so it will be indispensable to support these workers in this transition period. We also need a sound social protection system based on principles of solidarity and the distribution of risk, and with a minimum social protection floor to ensure protection for the most vulnerable people. I hope we all agree that creating true equal opportunities in the workplace will only be possible through a program that transforms for gender equality, with public policy promoting distribution of unpaid care at home, non-discriminatory access to employment, wages and training. And in this sense, we recall that temporary quotas can be very useful to reduce inequalities between men and women. Some of the new ways of organizing work as a result of the technological and digital revolution, I am referring to digital platforms. These are leaving out workers from the framework of labor, and we are calling for a system of international governments requiring compliance of certain rights and minimum protection. One formula could be a universal labor guarantee so that all workers, regardless of their contract, may enjoy fundamental rights at work as well as other basic labor rights. Digital and technological transformation will imply an opportunity to better reconcile working and family life, but also it will be necessary to extend sovereignty on time spent at work, considering a ceiling but also a floor to ensure survival. Digitalization, robotics, and automation are already presupposing, and this is clear if we analyze statistics on the disappearance of certain labor risks and the appearance of other risks. For example, there are many workers that suffer less stress because they no longer need to travel to their workplace and so do teleworking. But other risks are appearing, for example, cyber harassment, other forms of violence, and in this sense, ILO Convention 119 adopted last year includes these new labor risks. And lastly, it will be necessary to continue sustaining social dialogue and collective bargaining within this new framework. All workers, digital workers included, should enjoy the freedom of union, the right to collective bargaining, and the state must ensure these rights. We cannot admit that forms of AI, low human control, may affect decisions made by these AI systems under a discriminatory manner, and so we're advocating algorithms that have no gender bias. Ultimately, new ways are affecting the labor world, and this could close the gender gap, but this will not happen on its own. We need special measures, otherwise these difficulties might deepen. Thank you for your attention.
Horrible, horrible. Ya me toca. Thank you, Carmen, for this exhaustive presentation. on ILO's recommendations to take advantage of the technological revolution, trying to narrow the gaps from the labor market, ensuring good jobs for women. I now give the floor to Lise Otsby, who is Senior Advisor on Gender Equality from the Norwegian Directorate for Children, Youth, and Family Affairs. She's advisor for gender equality in Bungser, that is the Budfir, that is the agency in charge of that in Norway. She's been working with the Nordic Council of Ministers in Copenhagen, and before that for local governments and the modernization of Norway and Oslo. She stands at the European Council on behalf of Norway in gender issues, and she has worked in several international venues on this topic, and she's also in the observatory on this topic. She will be speaking in English. For those of you who need translation, please reach for your headsets. You have 10 minutes.
Buenos dias, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm sorry that my Spanish is not good enough to address you in Spanish, so I hope you can use the interpretation. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here and to attend this very interesting and relevant conference and share views with you. Gender mainstreaming is the strategy chosen in Norway for developing gender equal policies in all areas of society. In line with the Beijing platform, it is the different ministries' responsibility to make sure that all policies are gender equal and do not increase differences or create new hindrances against gender equality. This, of course, includes the digitalization and the labor policies. In Norway, the transition of the work life and the influx of women in the labor market started in the 1970s and has been developing steadily since. At this time, the care services went from being carried out in the private sphere to become a public responsibility. Childcare facilities, flexible working hours, parental leave, care for elderly, etc. were introduced. This made it possible for people to work full-time and have care responsibilities, which usually women did. At the same time, these arrangements and the new caretaking sector gave women new possibilities for paid work outside the home, performing professionally and being paid for duties they had already done within the household. The high rate of female participation in the labor force in Norway is also a result of welfare policies in other sectors. Free public higher education and financial support for students means that parents do not have to choose which child gets an education. Educational attainment is high, and higher education is not only for the wealthy. In Norway, 60% of university students today are women. Sorry. Critics often state that Norway's experiences with gender equality is not a good example, because the only reason we're able to maintain our extensive welfare system is our oil. However, they could not be more wrong. The high rate of female participation in the labor market is far more important to our economic performance than oil. Women in the workforce are the key to our wealth, not our natural resources. Norway has a thoroughly regulated labor market with an insignificant informal sector, and the informal sector has not been an important access point to the labor market for women. Women and men are closing the remaining gender gap, and the rate of women in the workforce today is above 67%, while it is 72% for men. But the OECD recently asked, in a report about the Nordic countries' economic gain from gender equality, if the last mile is the longest. We still have a gender-segregated labor market, and women work part-time more than men, just like in Latin America. And this is where we find today's greatest obstacles for achieving full parity. The digital revolution and transformation can only be a success if both men and women are a part of it, as well as a diversity of people. We need participation of both women and men in order to create a technological base to avoid the risk of backlash. It is the programmers who develop systems and code the machines that entails artificial intelligence. We run the risk of reproducing stereotyped views when using algorithms, of creating a new way of excluding parts of the population. And several researchers point out the risk that the new digital society will not only reproduce the inequalities between women and men, but that it can also enhance the differences. There are several well-known examples from real life that illustrates this, like how Amazon's recruitment robot excluded female candidates. If we are to give robots important tasks within our public administration, for example, within immigrant administrations, where decisions are made on who is allowed to stay in the country, and in the Social Security Administration, that decides what kind of social benefits applicants are entitled to. We need to be absolutely sure that they make correct decisions that are not based on bias. In theory, new technological services should be open-minded and gender-neutral, yet solutions that favor men over women are being created. This often happens because the digital innovations are made by men, and the data used in the development of new algorithms favor men. This bias may be defeated through recruiting more women to work in the field of technological development. And the central question is then how to recruit women and girls to education within the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and make them see this as a career option. The future will need to recruit the best people to develop and innovate the digital sector. Technological and social skills, as well as the ability to connect the two, will be important. It is crucial that we can choose from the best talent in the entire population, not only among the male 50% of it. It has been a goal for shifting governments of different political colors to change the gender-segregated education choices, as well as labor markets. And we have a number of activities targeting the challenge of recruiting more women to the STEM sector. Recently, a government-appointed mission called Young Today handed over its report to the Norwegian Minister for Gender Equality about challenges for girls and boys. It describes a number of gender inequalities in childhood and adolescence, and it shows that gender stereotypes and segregation starts at an early age, and that measures must be targeted towards this. The report gives important recommendations that are used for developing a government action plan to change the gender-divided choices. Girls and Technology is a partnership between social partners, universities, and the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise, where the aim is to recruit more girls to technological studies and programs through using role models. It started in 2003 and is upscaled again this year. Norway is a highly digitalized country, and we rank high on international indexes. The population have high digital competence and high rate of using digital tools. The high degree of digitalization is valuable in economic terms, both for public services, but also for private businesses, as both gain financially from a high degree of digital competence. The Norwegian government has an ambitious digital agenda, and to realize the benefits of digitalization in public administration, competence is needed both to develop and maintain services. In Norway, artificial intelligence is seen as the one emerging technology that may revolutionize how we deliver public services, operate our industries, and make our cities smart in order to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, quoting the Minister of Digitalization. The government recently launched a strategy for artificial intelligence, and it emphasizes that there is a need for tech-friendly regulations, access to data, and secure network connections. The minister stated that it is Norway's ambition to be world-leading in this field and to compete with China and the US nonetheless. One of Norway's, as well as the rest of the Nordics' great assets is the high sense of trust among the population. Both the trust in strangers, people you meet in the streets, but more importantly, in the government and in the public system. We trust that the government will work for the citizens' best interest and will make systems and act in ways that will benefit us all. This means, among other things, that the government has a good and detailed overview of its citizens. Most data in the National Statistical Office are found in registers that can be linked, and censuses are replaced by registers. This builds a good base when it comes to digitalization and may give us advantages, but it also demands a great level of security, especially related to ethics and protection of personal data. Artificial intelligence can have a positive impact on our lives in many ways. However, the technological development also entails risks and threats that we need to be aware of. For example, it opens a new field of harassment, especially harming women active in public debates, threatening their freedom of speech. A major message from Norway is that we need more research and knowledge about these issues. Will the digitalization and transformation lead to a more gender-equal work life? Or will it cement positions and maintain the status quo? Or will it create an even more gender-segregated society and labor market? For example, will the change lead to that the men from the industry sector that have now been automatized enter the healthcare sector? Will the healthcare sector be digitalized? Will these men create a new male-dominated high-tech branch of the healthcare sector, reproducing the gender segregation? These questions are difficult to answer, but definitely worth investigating, and the health sector will certainly need increased numbers of employees in the years to come, with the demographic changes and the aging population. Some tasks may be automatized, but we still need more warm hands. Digitalization can widen the gender gap, but used cleverly, it can contribute to closing it. A lot of questions remain, but one thing is certain. An engaged female workforce will benefit all of us and will be equally important in the years to come. Norway will continue to break down barriers and shatter glass ceilings, and I hope you all want to join us in the fight. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Lise, for sharing the Norwegian experience and to bringing two very important elements. On the one hand, questioning the neutrality of algorithms and the importance of having more women in science and technology as a strategy to reduce the gender gaps and bias. And there's also the issue of data digitalization and how data can bring in new opportunities to close gaps, but also different challenges as well. I now give the floor to Mónica Retamal Fuentes. She's Executive Director of CODEA. She is a social businesswoman in the technological field since '99. She currently is Executive Director of CODEA. That is a social enterprise aiming at creating and helping out new talent in the digital world with a more inclusive technological world and including women in science technology. She has been working in different operations, and she's also tried to make her companies open up into the international field. She also wants to bring in science and technology to the classrooms in Chile. She's led plans for labor transformation and digital empowerment. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I had my ideas jotted down, but after hearing all of the comments and presentations, I realized that the digital world is included in everything and everything that is human. That means economic empowerment, training, and a series of ethical conditions that are also brought about by this revolution. The thing is that very few of us understand the scope of the change, and since few of us understand it, many of us feel foreign to this. Our kids are right now 8 or 9 hours a day consuming technology, and this has a tremendous impact on everything that we cannot avoid. In our countries, to leverage this new wave of development, the so-called fourth industrial revolution, means changing every sort of thing, activity, changing infrastructure, scope, coverage, but perhaps the things that are most affected are education. We all realize now that education our kids are receiving are not related at all with the education that we foresee that is needed for this century, as well as the labor world and the human capital world where I've been working on, is something that is facing a lot of tension. In Chile, we're already witnessing not only the arrival of platforms and what that means in terms of the labor revolution, but also realizing that 40% of the companies that exist will disappear in a decade. This also brings a big change in the ecosystem, and it's dramatic. That means that when we start wondering, well, there are companies that die, but others are being formed. But the new ones have a strong digital content, and when you click and ask these companies, what does that mean in terms of employment? Well, they're searching openly for people with digital skills, skills that are not found in the existing human capital. Latin America here is facing a big issue in looking at international rates in an OECD test. And if you compare Latin America with these other countries in terms of digital higher skills, Chile is one of the countries that went better off. But here, 30% of the people weren't even able to sit in front of a PC, so they don't even have the skills to solve minimum problems. On the other hand, what are the states doing? They're trying to adapt to this new digital economy, and all of the services, public utilities and services are now becoming digital. And we wonder what will happen with the 30% of the population that doesn't even know how to use a PC. It is clear, though, that the labor force nowadays will have to learn new digital skills. I'm talking about digital skills because there is a close relation between these digital skills and the access to good wages. If we look at organizing people from level 1, here in Chile we've created level -1, and level 3, a level 1 worker earns 5 times less than one in level 3. So there's a big relation between the digital skills and better income and job access. And what is going to happen with the gaps? I believe that these gaps will turn even wider, and things such as universal wage are things that will have to be debated because we can't solve these gaps in this very short period of time available. What to do for the current labor force to participate in this fourth revolution? We've noticed there are many cities throughout the world that are already concerned with this mass labor conversion. It's something difficult to solve because it means changing the way people are trained. We know that changes in the education world are occurring, but very slowly. We need new systems, systems that will be able to train somebody who's working and who needs these new skills. And this is a big challenge. The boot camps, for example, is something that is being studied closely, but it's something completely new. They're still part of elite policies, so this is a big challenge for all of our countries and certainly for the labor ministries and other agencies. Digital skills, 21st century skills are not just digital skills. We also have critical thought, learning to learn, and the Latin American labor force is very little into this. Here we studied careers I studied almost 30 years ago, and I was never trained again. Learning to learn on a continuous basis in the midst of the fourth revolution, and we must set it up as of school age, and we have to look at what's happening in the schools.
Now, of course, these changes are also a great opportunity. The famous sophistication of the production matrix that we would all like to see in Latin America to no longer depend on natural resources is an opportunity. The OECD says that from 95 to 2015, the world has seen a 27% growth in jobs and in services and a major reduction in manufacturing. Now, in Latin American countries, I have the figures for Chile. We still don't see this in figures. In Chile, there are 2 million jobs very susceptible to automation in the next 5 years, and which imposes an agenda that's very complex. The other trend we see, and that is clear, is self-employment. It would seem that because so many industries will disappear, only trade that in Chile has the highest job share is the one that will most undergo automation. So the risk there is imminent. Now, this could be resolved with retraining, but today we do not see public policy very much aligned to that mindset, nor is the industry seen to be concerned. We're constantly in touch with enterprises to hear their opinion. They all start talking of reskilling and so on, but we've not actually seen anything being implemented or clear examples where we could draw new practices or good practices or learn. Now, focusing on the digital skills that are very important and cross-industry, one clear example that we see in Chile, at least, has to do with these digital transformation processes. Because here we're speaking not only of the digital industry, but the banking service, trade is also digitalizing, which means that they're becoming technology companies. And the installed capacity that they have today is no longer useful. And then there's a trade-off. Do I do away with my current staffing and introduce others? That doesn't really exist because these new workers don't really exist. Or should I retrain those workers I already have? Finally, I would like to say that there is a great opportunity here for gender policies. In the last 4 years, we have worked training women in terms of literacy, which means teaching people to, for example, use social networks to sell something. And this implies a sensitive change in the business model of someone who is not in the formal economy and learns how to trade product through social networks, all the way to what has to do with higher level digital skills. For example, teaching women to do programming. And we've seen that in that area, in 2 years, some women have trebled their income in this way. But when you see the data, we see that the threats are greater than the opportunities, because it is these same women that today are further out of the digital world. Only 7% of women are part of the digital revolution. Well, that would be it from me. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Monica, and also for putting up the issue of the gap between the skills needed by work today and the supply that countries in the region have today. And this has given us a different perspective of this digital revolution puzzle and how this affects the autonomy of women. And once again, I would like to hand over to Mario for some final comments, and then we will open up for Q&A from the audience. Thank you. I found these presentations very useful, and that countries in the region are working on this. In the case of the northern countries, the situation is different. But, well, I wanted to pick up on 4 issues and make a provocative comment. My fear is that gender policy may be marginalized or left as like a footnote. And that's of concern to me, because in the entire package of policies that we have today, this has a lot to do with the country's industrial and technological policy. And so, 4 important things here. First, this must be seen in a regional context where countries do little technological policies. People say Chile has a productive structure very much linked to natural resources. How many times has Chile been told to change it? Well, that didn't happen, or if it did, it was very little. Let's take the case of Chile, of Argentina. The government is now resuming its industrial policy, but it's still weak. And other countries don't really discuss scientific and technological policy, which means changing the meaning of the political structure or productive structure. So can we talk about a gender policy without you being the ones that provoke this? Because we on our own can't do it. So if there's someone who could do it, it's you. You are highly provocative. I am sure that my friend Mattia Kulfos or one or the other, but this omelette must be turned upside down. Well, for this to be not left as a footnote, how can we bring the topic to a political discussion? Because if you can put gender with a weak industrial policy that we have today, well, you yourself said this. You said technology is cross-cutting to all sectors. Some sectors are digital par excellence, but this affects everything. If I have an economy very much focused on copper and everything else is informal, and you say, yes, implement a gender policy. But no, this must be the first issue. So my point is, how can we say, well, what we need is an industrial policy that includes gender first, or a gender policy that moves towards an industrial policy? And I think there are 3 things of concern, and these were mentioned clearly. The first, who is going to create the algorithm, and how do you design the algorithm? This is very much linked to scientific and technological courses, and this in turn is very much tied to AI and data. So if you say, I have no industrial policy, and it's men that design the algorithm, and it's men that design AI policy, well, and data and courses are in their hands, well, we know that in the next 10 years is what we're going to be the same or worse off than before. I apologize for being so blunt, but what I'm saying is, or rather the question is, and I think you said this, how can we get this to leap in terms of quality, leap towards policies, industrial gender policies? Because nobody realizes, if we do not resolve this, there's going to be a tremendous weakness in all intermediate classes in Latin America that was going to be sustainable. But like a middle class, as I said, has the face of a woman. And, well, I think that the debate is very interesting, and I very much would like to hear the countries what they have to say, because this is a sector that has to do with the future. The future is this. The next 10, 20 years are going to be this. All countries have it in their agenda, but the effort to turn this around, how can we do that? I would like to open up for discussion, but I would like to hear you, the countries, organizations, agencies, and open up. So we still have time. We have about half an hour. So I would say, let's see what can come out of all this. To have a lot of women engineers doing AI, because when you say, one thing is to get 5 male engineers to draft a proposal, and, well, it's going to be biased, whether you like it or not. But how to have at least 3 on 3, data collection, data working, and the policy. So let me open up. Who can take the floor?
Argentina, así me gusta. Primero Argentina, luego, espera que hoy tomamos algunos. Colombia.
First Argentina, and then Colombia.
¿Quién ahí que no veo? México.
Mexico.
Argentina, Colombia, México. ¿Quién más? Me decían, ¿quién da más? No, porque yo, ¿saben qué? Dentro de poco me jubilo.
I will be retired soon. I put everything into the industrial policy, and I gave it all I had, and this is where we got. So now I'd like to hand it over to you. Yes, you. Let's begin with Argentina. The truth is, I love this panel, and I like this challenge that you are giving us. We in Argentina are only just embarking on this process. As you know, we're now inaugurating the Ministry for Women. But in Argentina, maybe with the rest of the countries as well, the biggest challenge is to address what you've just said. The level of economic concentration that exists in this universe, and that in our country, they're not sovereign of these economic policies that could turn around the extractivism that we're seeing today, and that might turn around the industrial situation that could be part of this digital revolution. I think that right now, countries are affected by transnationals at all levels, as far as our children that have mobile phones at home. Since we do not have engineers, women engineers, and I'm convinced that the only way that we could dismantle this tremendous inequality, as I heard Carmen say, everything that was needed for the Industrial Revolution for us to access, what we need is a framework of equality. Let's move towards a framework of equal rights for women and also for our countries, or say sovereignty, economic and political sovereignty for our countries, to account for this discussion, debate that we have at world level with this. Because otherwise we're going to be left way behind. Of course, we are accompanying all this, but women could address new issues. We have them already, and they're very much installed. And to turn around this inequality, I think that the strength of women in our countries, particularly in ours, where quite clearly feminism and diversity and a more modest sector women, it is us who have been able to advance and account for the disastrous situation that the neoliberal model has left us in. This is affecting all decision-making spaces, and that is the task, because when we're speaking of science and technology, clearly we need to talk of power, transnational power, male power, of course, and highly concentrated. And if we do not aim at those spaces, we will be far behind our real possibilities. So I think that this is a challenge, a tremendous challenge. I cannot speak of any achievement because we've only just started, but yes, our entire country and our ministry is in the direction of this discussion. Thank you. Thank you. Colombia. Thank you. As head of the statistical office in Colombia, we believe that there's a very interesting opportunity for information, and statistics may help make visible the gaps that we are in fact experiencing, and that might prevent an appropriate use of the technological revolution to favor gender equality. And it's there that the statistical offices are committed to using the cross-cutting gender perspective. And that involves aspects of great concern. For example, in Colombia, we have a survey, a transition survey on labor, and we asked young people who are working or unemployed, and what would they like to study in order to improve their living condition. And when we asked those who were working what they would like to study to improve their situation, when we get to STEM, science, technology, and engineering, and maths, first of all, we got to the smaller share of young people who think that this is the road to improve their work opportunities. But barely 39 or 40% of those young people are women. And when they are unemployed, only 2.8% of women think that science and technology courses are the way to resolve their unemployment. So based on that, aside from the statistics, what we need is that national training systems should have a comprehensive approach and have the gender perspective and have clear incentives to break these stereotypes and create incentives for women to consider STEM as possibilities to enhance their economic empowerment and their chances of making the most of this technological revolution. Along those lines, as you have said, Mario, the issue becomes very complex because it's not just labor market, it's not just education, it's culture. And stigmas not only in the areas of this fourth industrial revolution, but in general, when, for example, a World Economic Forum study asked the bosses, what difficulties do you face in achieving gender equality at your enterprise? And many of them answered that it's the unconscious biases behind cultural stigmas. So in Colombia, we think that this is a very important challenge for public policy, and we believe that the information that we could consolidate with that comprehensive cross-cutting approach, we need to make these gaps visible through statistics, and this would be a very important way to construct a solution, because it's complex, because it involves education, it involves cultural change, and also it involves having concrete evidence of the benefits brought about the cross-cutting gender perspective in public policy in order to make the most of the opportunities offered by this technological revolution. Thank you. Mexico. Thank you. Well, aside from the challenges linked to the labor market and science and technology and women's access to STEM areas noted here, we see challenges linked to the human rights of girls and women in our region and the rest of the world, and that, of course, require special attention and response by the governments. First of all, we think it's very important to bring your attention to the gender equality gap in relation to new technology. And according to the ITU, there's a tremendous gender bias in telecommunications. In Argentina, you say you've talked about the potential of new technology to extend the area where women could advance. However, given the structural nature of gender inequality, challenges have taken on dimensions that show a high-risk outlook. One linked to the monopoly of information originated by the concentration of digital corporations that have centralized the production and the distribution of content. Content that, as the Norwegian delegation said, is Anglocentric. Another challenge mentioned by Norway is cyber violence and the discourse of sexist hate. According to UN Broadband Commission, 63% of women have been the victims of cyber violence, in view of which digital corporations do have limited action in combination with the deficient action by the justice procurement systems in our country.
Naturally, these discrimination patterns are impacted by racism, homophobia, xenophobia, and the problem of gender violence in the digital world becomes even stronger amongst women journalists. In 2006, The Guardian analyzed 70 million comments published by users on their website. It showed that 8 of their 10 journalists who targeted this course were women. Attacks against women journalists are a clear threat to their own safety, well-being, and also towards diversity and freedom of expression. Violence against the women journalists is due to self-censure, and they avoid, in turn, publishing things that may risk their own lives. Another system is that having to do with sexual trafficking, changing girls and adolescents as the victims of the human trafficking that operate through social networks. Another one is the pornography expansion through the web. According to Peace Feminine Network, more than 10% of websites offer pornography, including infant child pornography. We also have to look at big data. Here we must wonder if big data is exploited towards greater general equality. The first thing that helps answer the question is to figure out who are the players who more benefit from the big data industry. Mainly, big data is concentrated in private companies. Far from using that to close down economic, social, and cultural gaps, they're being used for innovative systems in order to change data into marketing tools. As a result, we may understand that after a mastography, users start receiving their social networks advertising from private hospitals and private surgeons, offering even prostheses. This is something being used by private enterprise. And what about when we say that big data is a big business? In 2016, the value of European data was of 60 million euro. Another challenge has to do with gender discrimination in algorithms. We used to believe that they were neutral, as has been said by the Norwegian delegation. A challenge in the digital world is also related to the end of pluralism and fake news. In this analysis, digital corporations use algorithms to rank news and to publish them as trimmed pics. And this means that fraudulent news is being perpetrated. Media pluralism is allowing for other situations, but not that related to when to be published. We believe that this is all very important. In looking at this agenda here in Latin America and the Caribbean, we should consider the social and cultural dimension of this digital revolution and its implication for human rights of women and girls in the region. Thank you.
Oíste, por favor.
ILO.
Tomar el reto sobre
I'd like to return to the challenge on industrial policy. At ILO, we have a research program that is pretty important, and it's related to productive diversification. Indeed, if we look at the policies that we've been debating today on the digital gap, we'd be talking about supply policies in the job offer, not the demand for jobs. And we find a tremendous challenge for the region. Not only do we have a digital gap between men and women, much more for women, as we all see throughout the world, but we also have an educational gap. As my colleague from UNICEF well said a couple of days ago, we must start breaking down this education gap. The policy for productive diversification or industrial policy must shows that we haven't been able to close down the education gap. We're not creating knowledge. And how many digital entrepreneurship comes from our region? A few, but not that much. A country such as Costa Rica, for example, is beginning to work in an industrial policy. But it's important that this new policy to close the digital gap will be joining these new policies for productive development. And Chile is now beginning with this kind of effort, but it's only slight. And the same is seen in Colombia. A report that was submitted to this conference brought in these topics that we, as gender experts or women's ministers, don't really think about. And I'm talking about the productive diversification, foreign trade, these basic topics that are so needed to close the gaps. There are many challenges involved that must be seen from the side of the supply. We must, we do have a consensus. CAS, IDB, UNDP, ECLAC, they all are working on this, as well as ILO. So what I'm saying is that we should continue with this consensus on the diagnosis, but can we now devote even small efforts in our countries, but do it jointly? We invite women's ministries to be part of this challenge. It's a Latin challenge belonging to all of our countries, and we have to start from the classroom. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. You have the floor. Thank you. I also wish to talk about the digitalization. During times of crisis, I will later on talk about climate change. But I did want to talk about this. We are a monetary agency, and we wish to act as soon as possible in view of emergencies. We are learning and we are adapting all digital opportunities to find out about the damage and the extension of the damage occurred to know what to do. This is part of the operation that we conduct in our association. But what's really important is that this allows us to be permanently connected with people who are being affected by the disaster, both men, women, boys, and girls. But becoming a digital agency doesn't necessarily ensure that everything we do will, thanks to the digital world, will instantly improve or narrow the gaps and have a positive impact on women. It doesn't instantly occur. We do believe that in order to contribute to that cause, we must take advantage of digital instruments so as to better analyze the vulnerability and the impact of disasters, knowing the different needs between men and women so that we may implement programs that will truly respond to these specific needs. The region is also seeing efforts in different countries so that through digital and other tools we may become reactive platforms in views of emergencies. We're now working in the Caribbean, supporting islands after disasters. But the digital gaps here, we must also act during times without crisis in a preventive effort. There, we'll make sure that when crises do come, we don't want the crisis, but with climate change, they are inevitable. But when they do come, no one will be left behind because of the use of these platforms. As PMA, we are at the service of all governments here present in order to work towards this outcome and making sure that digitalization of all of us who are here in all processes will truly become not digitalization for itself, but as a transforming agents in the hands of women to narrow gaps and not to widen them. Thank you. Thank you. UN Women, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I am really appreciative for all of the comments made here. At UN Women, we have this topic at the core of our agenda into the future and the possibility of narrowing out gaps. In Uruguay, recently a study was conducted. Soledad Salvador, by the way, is over here. And there we see that only 15% of women hold highly productive jobs. That means we have to question everything that is involved. Decent works, better income jobs, how digitalization will affect this, the fourth industrial revolution I'm talking about. So the region must deal with this seriously and not just through limited, scattered action. The first step that we have adopted this year is a survey through all of Latin America and the Caribbean that will soon be made available to all countries in the region, trying to list all of the policies, laws, and national plans that have to do with gender equality. And we have seen that there has been a mutation. In some countries, gender equality and STEM showed up first together with gender policies. A second stage came about where we see these topics mentioned. And as you well said, Mario, only in a secondary, isolated fashion. And in the laws for science and technology as well. And only recently, as Costa Rica well said, we are seeing a mutation towards specific policies. And there is where we must focus all of our activities in our countries. What can also be made available to all countries is a survey that we also conducted in Latin America and Caribbean, where we've looked at more than 80 instruments and good practices that have to do with all of these topics. They have to do with instruments to raise awareness and to get rid of gender stereotypes in STEM, aiming at bringing boys and girls equally to these sciences through workshops and training, supporting women into science and technology careers, in institutional committees under STEM that have just been created, and also to strengthen entrepreneurial women. Thus, we put this all to your service. Thank you. I think he said UNDP. I wish to greet all of the governments here present. Our latest report on human development talks about the big transformations that we are witnessing and try to close down gaps. One of them has to do with technological change. The report looks at the jobs that will come into the future and those that will disappear, and the need to train human capital to face these changes. There are changes in consumption and how we can use technology to solve complex problems mankind is facing. We also need to join these two, trying to get the technology to narrow gaps. We are working with some countries in order to close these digital gaps. We're holding dialogues, trying to talk with the public, private sector, and the educational sector, and trying to identify where are the gaps of human capital, and trying to find out what are the jobs that are to be made available. That is, finding out the needs from the market so that the human resources may be well trained, and also trying to figure out where women are lagging behind and investing in new platforms that will in turn adapt this kind of training so that these people may better have access to good jobs. There are programs of certification, but with the equal gender seals. Otherwise, we will continue repeating the fact or what used to happen in the past. We want women to have access to these jobs with the necessary skills. If we don't get this to happen, the transforming change will not come about. We are also working on this. Another discussion that we are holding is related to funding SDGs. Here, the necessary resources have to do with companies that don't have a specific headquarter. They're big platforms where this may create new taxes that are right now being avoided. We're also promoting this kind of dialogue. And finally, the interagency work that has been very important with ILO and UN Women on the minimum social protection. This will be affecting many women. We must create some kind of adjustment or transition, and for that we need social protection system that will face the gender divide. And here we have new tools on how to include gender, and this can also be made available to all countries here present. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I not only serve as the Secretary General of the ACS, but I am also the chair of the Open Campus of the University of the West Indies, which is a university that is in the top 5% in the world and number 3 in Latin America and the Caribbean. And at our university, most of the people who graduate are females, 70 to 75%. And in every faculty, we have that distribution. In engineering alone, we have a 50-50%. It means that women are being trained at that level in the Caribbean. Yet we do not have access to the jobs in technology. I think it is, as Colombia and Mexico said, it is about the valuing of women's work. I think that it is a cultural issue. How many people in here would appreciate a black woman from the Caribbean heading Microsoft? Think about it, it's a value issue. And so they prefer to have us at the lowest level of technology where we are not involved in the process, so we input data, or we are secretaries when we are very highly trained. So I think we must put some emphasis on changing minds of culture when it comes to women and technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mario Castillo.
Mario Bertillo, you have the floor. Thank you. Let me say that right here in this panel, one of the strategic fields that is a gender division from ECLAC has been working together with UN Women in having a more strategic outlook on the digital revolution, industrial policy, and gender. When we talk about this, I'm saying that we don't just wish to have the gender element cut across everything we do, but also this involves redesigning digital revolution, having this topic in mind. We have now developed a first chapter that is really of an exploratory nature. And we have created evidence and a working team to make working hypotheses and to continue making headway in this. I could summarize this into three main findings. First of all, we realize that the region has made progress mainly in access to IT, both among men and women. The region is a big user of information technology in all fashions, but with little co-participation in the digital field. We are digital consumers, big consumers. And the digital market in the region is very, very profitable. It's an emerging market throughout the world. But we take up this technology. We use platforms, but with little generating capacity.
Today, we're undergoing a process consolidating the economy of platforms, and where there's a very high concentration of enterprises and services. And what we can see is that gender gaps have been reproduced in the digital economy in comparison to the real economy. We did a first big data analysis within ECLAC with the collaboration of other institutions in the region, and we saw that in some cases these gender gaps are not only being reproduced but broadened. The deep economy in the region, and comparing this to what happens in the US and the UK, we see that it is reproduced. Now, what is the opportunity? And many people mentioned this, Monica among others. Today, there's a change in paradigm of the platform economy toward the 4.0 industry. And so not only are the information technology company, the technological ones, but with the 4.0 industry, any sector, no matter how traditional, could become technological. And so that's a great opportunity. And so therefore, the the concentration process as occurred with the platforms, in this case, will be different because every industry and service will be located in markets. And so singularity will be important from the viewpoint of the applications. I think that there lies the big opportunity. What we have considered is that the region should move towards a regional market, because you require critical mass. There's a challenge of the interconnectivity of the infrastructure, regulatory harmonization. These are challenges, but it is possible to move towards a digital regional market, and on that basis, determine a new industrial policy approach, or say 4.0, where the gender dimension appears as essential. I think that this is something that we're inviting all countries to carry out. We've been working with Costa Rica and also with Chile, and we've been working with Argentina and Colombia as well. But we have different initiatives, and I think that there's a tremendous potential there to make headway in this area. Thank you. Thank you. Over there. Maria Jose Libertino from the Gender Equity Commission of the Civil Society Council, Foreign Affairs Ministry, Argentina. Some comments. First of all, I believe that not only according to gender, but also the gap in general, we should move towards recognizing access to the internet as a basic human right. I think that it would be very good to move ahead in this way, if not globally, well, at least have some sort of an initiative at regional level, as the Escazú Agreement, in terms of information and environmental issues. I think that we must decide on measures against the concentration in just a few hands of all digital and telephone and internet developments in so very few hands. When we describe the reality of the gap and inequality, precisely when we refer to those few 8, 9, or 10 worldwide multi-billionaires, many of them are precisely the owners of these high-tech companies, Microsoft, Google, and so on. And so it doesn't necessarily imply restricting the access to the data, but yes, have rules for the game. As Nadine was saying, as responsible of the Institute of Women in Mexico, Mariana Baeza, in order to think of generation and equality. And I think that one of the possible areas for partnership, and where we should sit these companies down around the table, at least at regional level, is to have monitoring mechanisms so that there is no discrimination. Because sometimes ridiculous things happen. We published our demonstration, and then a woman's breast appear, and then it is brought down from the internet, and that blocks our march. Well, I think that there are public policies that could be devised to reduce the gap. The government, although there has been discontinuity, has now picked up again this idea of distributing notebooks in public, primary, and secondary schools for girls and boys. Free software or open source software also facilitates access. But I think we also should have public renewable energy companies, and also for pharmacies and people with disability and elderly people, because in the region there is scientific development that could very well compete with international scientific development. But we're in a situation where we end up depending on the patents or the importation of foreign technology, when in fact we could have our own locally developed technologies. And we could have scientist women at the head of many of these ventures. So for me, this, yes, it resolves the gender gap when we think of how women could lead the solution to the gap, and that is detrimental to other sectors that are also vulnerable. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I believe that the room must be free at 1 for another side event on women, territory, and migration in the countries in the north of South America within the framework of this 14th WCR. So thank you, WCD. So this meeting will resume at 2:30 p.m. Thank you.